Well, good day, friends. I am very excited to be able to welcome a very good friend and an accomplished organist to the bench of St. Albans, Michael Bloss. I got to know Michael very well during my 4 years of working at Christ Church Cathedral in Hamilton, where he was, until very recently, the director of music and the organist. He has recently accepted the position of director of music at St. Andrew's in Grimsby, and I'm really looking forward to his creative musical and theological formation opportunities. Today, we're going to do something just like that. In this short series that we produced together, Michael is going to demonstrate how a very, very simple plain chant tune, a Gregorian tune, can be used to create manifold and various improvisations, interpretations, and soundscapes. Now, the tune that we've chosen for today's presentation is that of Mysterium Divinum, and it's more commonly called or known as the hymn of the Father's Love Begotten. And in our Anglican Blue Book of Common Praise, the chant has been interpreted as hymn number 132. Now, the lyrics of the hymn are very ancient and very venerable, and that's another reason why we chose this tune. It's a very important treasure of the Christian tradition. It knows no boundaries, and it was written in a time and an era when there was one church, when the church was young and still, trying to figure out who and what she was. So this song, Mysterium Divinum, or Of the Father's Love Begotten, well, it transcends politics and denominational divides. And it represents, a piece of, living theology, a living theology of the church that belongs to everyone. Now, the lyrics, we're not too sure when the lyrics were written, but probably around the year 390. And it was written by Aurelius Prudentius. Prudentius is widely recognized as one of the very first Christian poets. Now, he composed poems as a way to help people learn their faith through repetition. Hence, you will notice, if you look up the lyrics to the hymn of the Father's Love Begotten, you'll notice that the refrain is repeated over and over, evermore and evermore. Every stanza contains those words. Piece of poetry. So using poetry to help spread Orthodox theology during a time when the church was battling several heresies, and these heresies were fighting for the attention and the allegiances of the people, well, poetry and repetition proved itself successful. Beautiful art, the beautiful icons and mosaics that we see in old churches, beautiful poetry, beautiful hymnody, well, those became the means through which, quite frankly, illiterate persons could come to know and accept faith in Jesus Christ. So this hymn, Mysterium Divinum, resonates with, the poetic timbre of the Gospel according to St. John. It speaks confidently of Jesus, the Word of God, who was in the beginning and is in the end, the Alpha and the Omega. So listen now just to verse 1 of the hymn, as it is taken right out of our blue hymnal. Of the Father's love begotten, ere the world began to be. He is Alpha and Omega, he the source, the ending he. Of the things that are and have been, and that future years shall see, evermore and evermore. And now listen to the prologue of St. John's Gospel. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things came into being through him, and without him, not one thing came into being. What has come into being in him was life, and the life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness did not overcome it. Now let's head over to the church, and we're going to listen to Michael interpret this hymn for us. And keep in mind that not only is he using musical notes to enliven the music, but he is using our very own organ to do so. By manipulating the stops and working with that instrument, Michael demonstrates both the versatility and the strength of the instrument. It was a joy to record this. Welcome, Michael. So let's go over to the church and listen to these interpretations of Divinum, Mysterium.
So today we're going to explore musical settings that are related to the hymn tune Divinum Mysterium, or often known to the text of Eternal Love Begotten. Oftentimes used as a procession, and the style, the genre of this is known as plain chant. Plain chant grew as a way of creating music to fit the flow of text, and these specific tunes became related directly to their particular text. So Divinum Mysterium is very unique, as is, for example, Veni Creator Spiritus, which often gets sung at Pentecost. The thing about plain chant is that it's very straightforward, very even, something like this. And then the text flows around that in a very easy and very calming sort of way. So the first thing I think we'll do is play through the entire tune of Divinum Mysterium, just so that we can get that sound picture into our ears. Around which all of the notes go. In that particular setting, we use the key of E major, just because it's settled on the key of E. But you'll find that in some hymnals, or even some composers' setting of this, that a different key might be used, say for example, E flat. And often that just gives a totally different feel for the spirit and the atmosphere of the chant. So I'll play one phrase in E major, which was where we just were, and it has this very light, very joyous kind of feel. Now let's say we want to try it in E flat, and you'll hear there's suddenly a different nobility that happens in the sound. Now that we've heard the tune, we're going to explore three different organ settings. And these settings are what we might call them choral preludes. And choral preludes take the spirit of a piece of music, sometimes verbatim chorale melody, and creates a whole composed piece of music, which an organist might use to introduce the tune at a service. These three settings will use different areas of the organ here at St. Albans, and we'll have a sample of what those are. The first piece is by the composer Craig Phillips, who has done an awful lot of really good work with trying to make modern choral prelude settings of various hymn tunes. And in this piece, we're going to be using the 8-foot and the 2-foot stops. Now, just a word about these numbers. If we talk about an 8-foot stop, if I play a key on the keyboard with an 8-foot stop, it'll sound the same as it would if we played it on a piano. So in this case, is that 8-foot feel. A 4-foot stop is an octave higher, so half the value. So playing the same note, it sounds an octave higher. A 2-foot is an octave higher again. And so when we add these together, we get a fuller sound. So starting again with the 8-foot, adding the 4-foot, adding the 2-foot. Now if we take away one of those, we get a different sound again. So therefore now we have 8 and 2. The nice thing about an organ is that we have two, in this case, 2 keyboards, but each keyboard has its own particular strength. So the keyboard down here, the great, is a slightly more forward sound than its colleague up on top called the swell. Also, an 8-foot and a 2-foot stop on that keyboard. So in this piece, we'll hear a little dialogue between those 2 families of stops. So from that very jaunty, dance-like setting, we now have a prelude on Divinum Mysterium by the composer Frederick Candlin. Candlin was from a generation of composers, church musicians, who began their career in the UK and then emigrated to North America. In this case, Candlin became the director of music at the famed St. Thomas Church in New York. What you'll find in this piece is something just a little bit more straightforward, but also a little bit more obscured. We don't have as much of a verbatim recitation of the melody like we heard in the previous one, except as we get towards the end of the piece, it'll become a little bit more clear. And in this case, I think the composer is using a bit of symbolism in that things are a little bit uncertain at the beginning of the piece, but then reaches its full fulfillment at the end with a triumphant statement. In this piece, we're going to use a family of stops called the string stops. And they sound something like this. Very quiet, very ethereal. And it's an interesting concept of organ building that creates this sound. We start with a basic pitch, but then we put to it another set of pipes which are tuned a little bit on the sharp side. So we have that basic pitch, and then the sharp one. And when you put the two of them together, then we get that little bit of out of phase sort of sound, which gives that idea that it's a string instrument or a set of string instruments. Together with that, we use a flute stop on this keyboard down here, which is a softer sound compared to this sound. The reason being, this one is a wood stop. Most pipes are metal, but in this case, we have it constructed out of wood. So this particular prelude then uses a lot of the 8-foot flute stop and contrasts it with the string writing. composers use different colors in the organ to bring variety and creativity to their settings of pieces. But sometimes they also use certain compositional techniques. And you might have heard this in the last piece by Candlin. Towards the end, it sounded a bit like Row, Row Your Boat Ashore, in the sense that one keyboard was outlining the hymn tune, and then the other hand would play a response, something like this. Sort of like a call and response. We call that writing in canon, where one part follows another. Well, in this next piece, also a setting of Divinum Mysterium, this time by the American composer Alfred Fiedak, he uses that same idea except now transposed. In other words, in the previous example, it was at the same pitch. But now you'll hear it happening at an interval of a fifth. So where the melody was, what you'll hear at the beginning of the piece now is up here. The neat thing about this is that it is in the same key. So on the one hand, you'll hear that, but then the melody sort of an interesting polytonality. This particular setting is lovely. It starts that way, and this one uses only the 4-foot stops. We've been talking a lot about 8-foot stops, but now if we just use those without the benefit of the octave below, we get this feeling of it being floating, almost levitating. That sort of feel. Anyway, we have those colors and compositional techniques at the beginning of this piece, and then finally we get a very full conclusion to Divinum Mysterium.